Hello, my name is Jeremy, and I will be sharing with you about where do memories get stored in our brain. While many over the years have tried suggesting theories and explanations, we're still unable to come up with a definitive answer to this question. That being said, every journey begins with a single step, and our journey to find out what our brain does with our memory starts from something called the multi-store model of memory. The multi-store model of memory was developed by American psychologists Richard Atkinson and Richard Schifrin in 1968 and was created to offer an explanation of how and where memories get stored in our brain. The core idea behind this model is that there are three types of memories, with each being kept in separate unitary memory stores, namely the sensory memory, the short-term memory, and the long-term memory. However, how much of this is scientifically accurate, and is there any other research that supports this claim? Therefore, I will be firstly discussing several sources of evidence that supports the model's validity. Subsequently, the strengths and weaknesses of these sources will be evaluated in order to determine how reliable they are. Finally, I will be offering a concluding statement regarding the multi-store model after the presentation of the supporting evidence from other researchers within the field. The first source of evidence to support the multi-store model of memory are zero-position experiments. In 1855, a German psychologist by the name of Hermann Ebbinghaus coined the term zero-position effect and theorized that the position of an item on a list would affect recall. Ebbinghaus's theory would eventually be tested and observed almost a century later in Bennett Murdoch's 1962 experiment, during which he demonstrated how participants were able to recall words positioned at the start and at the end of a list rather than those in the middle. So, why was this the case? It was suggested that the words at the beginning of the list were able to be recalled with greater ease because participants had more time to repeat them acoustically over and over again. As a result of rehearsal, the words, which had initially been temporarily stored within the participants' short-term memory, had been transferred into their long-term memory, which has the ability to store a significantly higher volume of information for an indefinite amount of time. This is known as the primacy effect. On the other hand, words at the end of the list were able to be recalled by participants as they were utilizing their short-term memory to store information that was most recently encountered. This is known as the recency effect. So, how does this evidence support the multi-store model? The conclusions made by Murdoch to explain the primacy and recency effect observed during his experiment was based on the idea that different stores of memory were being used to aid the participants in their recall of words. In other words, the long-term and short-term memory were responsible for the observations caused by the primacy and recency effect respectively. This therefore supports one of the key features of the multi-store model of memory, which is that multiple unitary stores of memory exist. Moving on, the second source of evidence comes from the study of individuals diagnosed with amnesia, a condition that is generally described as the partial or complete loss of memory as a result of injury or damage to the brain. The most notable case study involves Henry Mollison, or patient HM as he is colloquially known within the field of psychology. After undergoing an experimental procedure to remove the part of the brain responsible for his severe epileptic seizures, HM became extremely forgetful. In fact, he was incapable of remembering anything that occurred more than a mere few minutes earlier. Despite this, he was interestingly still able to recall events and memories that occurred much further in the past, such as those from his childhood. Eventually, HM was diagnosed with anterograde amnesia. This meant that he was unable to form new, long-term memories. The study of HM supports the multi-store model of memory as it provides evidence showing how the short-term memory and long-term memory are two separate, distinct stores. During the operation, HM's surgeon had removed his hippocampus, a component of the brain that plays a vital role in long-term memory. Unfortunately, HM's surgeon was unable to anticipate how the removal of his hippocampus would critically impair his ability to form any long-term memories thereafter, as our understanding of the human brain and the various functions of its structural components was rudimentary at that time. Therefore, the case of HM, particularly the selective nature of his memory loss, supports the idea of separate memory stores. The third and final source of evidence that supports the multi-store model comes from a form of neuroimaging known as functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI. fMRIs measure the amount of activity within specific parts of the brain by detecting fluctuating levels of blood flow. In other words, as the level of activity within a particular part of the brain increases, so too will the amount of blood flow. The fMRI made it easier to study the brain in a non-invasive manner. Since the 90s, a vast number of fMRI studies sought to investigate and determine which part of the brain was instrumental in the performance of specific memory-related tasks. In two separate studies, it was found that tasks that involve short-term memories activated the prefrontal cortex and parietal lobe, while tasks that involve long-term memories activated the prefrontal cortex, temporal lobe, and located within it, the hippocampus. These findings are aligned with the facts from patient HM's case, which cited the removal of his hippocampus as the main reason why he was unable to form new long-term memories. With that being said, fMRI studies are another source of evidence that presents empirical data supporting the multi-storm model. In the example that was highlighted, a cause and effect methodology was applied, which studied the change in activity levels within specific parts of the brain associated with tasks requiring the activation of a particular memory store. Moving on, I will be discussing the various strengths and weaknesses of the evidence provided. Going back to the first source of evidence that was highlighted for its support of the multi-storm model, the zero position effect studied by Bernard Murdoch was effective in demonstrating how primary and recent information is better recalled due to the utilization of different memory stores. The fact that this was an experiment conducted in a highly controlled environment suggests that the observations of participants' recall ability was affected by the independent variable and not because of other confounding variables. However, Murdoch's experiment fails to account for the other ways that information gets stored in a long-term memory store, such as flashbulb memories. Flashbulb memories refer to highly detailed, vivid snapshots of a particular moment or experience that gets retained for a lifetime. As for the study of patient cases such as the example of HM, researchers will be able to conduct investigations that are incredibly detailed as the focus is narrowed down to a single subject, from which qualitative data may be obtained. This would not be realistic in scenarios involving a large number of research participants. On the flip side, as case studies only focus on one particular individual, the findings obtained may not necessarily be applicable to other individuals, nor would it be a good representation of the wider population. This is due to the fact that every case involving a different individual is highly unique. As such, the external validity of case studies may be affected. Furthermore, case studies are based on the analysis of qualitative data. As with the case of observed results, a lot of the conclusions drawn may depend on how the researcher interprets the information that was acquired, leading to potential observer bias in which the subjective opinions of the researcher affects the final assessment of what a set of data means. Lastly, the studies involving fMRIs provide clear empirical evidence when attempting to investigate which part of the brain is responsible for tasks involving the use of different stores of memory in a non-invasive manner. However, when investigating the effects of causality, the issue of causal oversimplification becomes an issue. Arriving at the conclusion that a task requiring the use of a particular memory store is solely responsible may be difficult. This is due to the possibility that there are other unforeseen factors or variables that may have influenced or contributed to the outcome that was observed. To conclude, the multi-store model of memory proposed by Richard Atkinson and Richard Schifrin is by no means a perfect representation of how memory works. The main criticism for the model as a whole boils down to how it is overly simplified and fails to account for several other types of memories that have been discovered by other researchers over the years. Although some of the model's claims have been discredited since its publication, Atkinson and Schifrin's idea of multiple memory stores such as the short and long-term memory remain fundamentally acknowledged within the field of psychology. In spite of its limitations, the multi-store model of memory also remains recognized as the first widely accepted model of memory, which many others have used as a foundation for their own personal research, leading to the complex and much more detailed models of memory we now know of today.